I once worked as a detective for missing persons. I left because of this situation. I joined the police when I was just 21 years old. I have always been intrigued by the concept of missing people situations. Finding missing persons had a purity and righteousness that was difficult to find in other aspects of law enforcement. It was also more exciting than dealing narcotics and more morally clear-cut than homicide. It was a flawless job, and I would always be doing well. Naturally, it took me 6 years of pacing the beat before I could finally sit for the promotional exam to become a detective. Then, it took another 4 years until the chance to switch to the missing persons department presented itself. Not many individuals can say they are truly passionate about their work, but I could feel that I was making a difference every day. Returning a kid to their parents who had been assumed dead is a very gratifying event. There was always a voice in the back of my mind reminding me that the victim was still out there somewhere. Of course, on the flip side, there was the crushing despair every time a case went cold. No matter how impossible the case seemed, no matter how much I reassured myself that there was nothing more I could do. The toughest part was realizing I had lost a life when we discovered a corpse. I frequently see their faces in my nightmares since there are so many people out there who I either never discovered or discovered too late. I've had to deal with a lot of extremely ill people in my time, therefore the perpetrators have also stuck with me. I dealt with a lot of terrible instances and frequently questioned my abilities. But as I've already mentioned, this is the one that convinced me to quit my job permanently and never look back. I was one of the department's most seasoned detectives by this point in my career. In the majority of cases, I was given the initiative, and I was frequently expected to assume leadership roles when things went south. As soon as I entered the station, I was informed of the call that had come in during the night. 2 girls and 3 boys, all between the ages of 4 and 6, had vanished from the same neighborhood on the same day, literally just a few blocks apart. Out of respect for them and their families, I won't give you their names or who they were. Additionally, I won't include any locations or other specifics that could give the case away. Trust me, the less you know about it, the better. I made the executive decision to approach this case as a serial kidnapping case because of the striking similarities in the circumstances surrounding each disappearance. Typically, a creep would drive a van through the neighborhood picking up as many children as he could. So we started working right away. Although it's cliché, the first 48 hours are actually the most crucial in situations like these. I sent junior detectives to interview the other parents while my partner and I went to interview one set of parents because we wanted to move quickly. The parents I spoke with stated that they had last seen their son playing on the front yard the morning before. The mother had been watching him from outside, but she had to quickly hurry inside to turn off the oven. When she hurried back outside, her son had vanished. Short inquiries to the neighbors yielded no further information. None of them had observed anything. The other detectives had returned with similar accounts of parents turning away for a brief period of time while their child vanished. Without any leads, we started our next phase, which was looking for CCTV in the neighborhood. Fortunately, there were busy shopping malls and high streets surrounding the suburbs where the children were removed. These locations frequently have a large number of security cameras. But obtaining and reviewing so much video takes time, and we were wasting critical time. My superiors gave me the go-ahead to enlist additional officers in order to promptly verify every camera. I'm proud of my team because we found the correct video in just 24 hours. The 2 detectives who had discovered the evidence, myself, and a few of my higher-ranking co-workers convened in my office to examine it. When they showed the video to us, those 2, who were only junior detectives at the time, seemed a little uneasy. They told us the clip's content was weird before we all settled in to watch. In retrospect, that wasn't the right word to use. We urged them to summarize the contents of the video, but they insisted that we watch it for ourselves first. At the back of a grocery store, facing one of those street depots where food trucks pull in to unload and resupply, was where the camera that had captured the video. When you pass those spooky-looking, old cardboard box-filled lanes behind shops on the street, something feels eerily off. The perp must have gained access to this particular property because it had openings on 2 public highways. It makes sense that no one noticed because the roads were unusually calm for the area. The lengthy lane was vacant when the CCTV footage started. Then, Way back, right at the end, we started to see a pixelated, hazy figure emerge from the shadows. It was still in the poor quality image stage, so we couldn't tell what it was. The shifting jumble of fuzzily colored pixels became closer and closer until we could make out an adult walking with a group of kids following behind him. We were surprised because it is uncommon for kidnappers to remain on foot. This made it far more difficult to understand how he could have abducted the children covertly. We all audibly gasped when the gang finally came into clear view. A combination of shock, perplexity, and, in my case at least, panic. In your line of work, you encounter many terrifying situations, but few are comparable to what you saw on the video screen. I'll do my best to explain the bizarre sight that greeted us. The figure was dressed in a strange outfit, and we could tell that he was a male because of his towering height. He was wearing one of those Mr. Punch masks, which is a creepy mask with a protruding chin, a nose that was too large, and bulging eyes. The skin of the mask's face had been painted inexplicably palely, almost snow white, contrasting shamelessly with the cheeks that were dyed red, giving the inadvertent appearance of someone who was close to death. I won't be hesitant to admit that the mask's cartoonish design and wildly exaggerated angles and features left me feeling really uneasy. Something about the bulging eyes, with their inflated veins and crudely drawn pupils, gave the impression that they were staring at me through the screen and into my head. Additionally, although being simply a mask, the smile exuded an unmistakable sense of malice and cunning intent. I was incredibly terrified when I spent too much time staring at the mask. I had the impression that something dreadful and evil was scouring the world for me. Whoever the person behind this face was, they were a disturbed person. The man wore an odd hat, one that was black, resembled a medieval jester nearly exactly, and had silver baubles at the end of each sleeve. His hair was hidden by the cap and bells because they extended long enough down the back of his head. He was wearing an odd coat that seemed more like a robe. It was overly long, spilling below his ankles, pooling on the ground around him in folds, almost like a tiny bridal train. It had no buttons or a zip. The garment was made of thousands of colored patches that were sewed together, although it wasn't particularly colorful. None of the patches were colorful or vivid. Instead, they were all varied shades of dark brown, gray, deep maroon, dirty yellow, chemical orange, and inky green. The coat's lack of any aesthetically acceptable colors gave the impression that it was intentionally designed to be unappealing to the eye. There were many more pockets on the coat than could ever be stuffed. There seemed to be a pocket sewn into practically every patch. A ribbon handkerchief protruded from each of these pockets, the two on his left and right hip. The handkerchiefs featured an alternating diamond design in black and white. The children were holding onto the handkerchiefs firmly as they extended a few meters behind the father. These children were the missing children we were searching for, according to a facial scan of theirs. Yet none of them appeared traumatized, and none seemed distressed or in tears. They were all holding handkerchiefs while grinning and laughing. The cloth strips resembled those endless magic tricks performed by magicians. 3 kids on one side and 2 on the other clung on with both hands. They definitely had been trained by the jerk in the mask because they skipped ahead joyfully and enthusiastically. Uncomfortably, he began to skip as well. He made merry hops with his knees up, resembling a dance or jive. Every time he jumped up and down, he lifted his feet, which were covered in peculiar, pointed shoes with upward curling heels. The man put a wooden pipe to the mouth hole in the grinning mask's mouth while keeping time to this spooky jig down the dark lane. He was continuously playing the same song. That song has long been one of my favorites. There is something incredibly captivating about the straightforward melody that is repeated again and over. However, hearing it in this environment was absolutely horrifying. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen as I was listening to the song for an extended period of time since it was so captivating and nearly hypnotic. Additionally, the musicians playing had a lingering, unidentifiable dissonant sound every now and again. The eerie figure at the front guided the troop as they walked through the lane until they were no longer visible on the security camera. My colleagues investigators and I were astounded and unsure of what to make of it. We had never seen something like this in any of our individual careers. Was that ominous person truly there somewhere? Could this actually be happening? We weren't going to leave those kids with someone that deranged, but at least it helped to reinforce our resolve. We rapidly sent reports asking anyone who might have seen someone who matched the peculiar description of the individual we had seen to contact us as soon as possible. Witness sightings were our greatest hope at that moment. I erred by telling the distraught parents that their children will be returned home. But as the days passed, we were forced to expand our search beyond the city to the district and, eventually, the state. We wanted to catch him without a doubt. We held our first press conference and, along with it, we shared a still image from the security tape, which prompted a lot of absurd inquiries. I believe the kidnapper was given his name, the Piper, by the first newspaper immediately at the conclusion of the first week. I have to admit, that made sense. His peculiar attire, musical prop, and, most importantly, the way those young people were just gleefully skipping around next to him, almost in a trance, all called to mind the well-known Pied Piper tale. The term stuck, and soon the public and all of the press were referring to him by that name. The public love criminals with a nickname. I will admit that we started referring to him as the Piper in the station. Unfortunately, there were no reports of sightings. Nobody had seen the unusual form. When we received the call, we had just started to give up hope. A man from a nearby town had seen a man late one night in the alleyway behind his apartment building wearing clothing similar to that of the Piper, with the children standing behind him. We went over there and spoke with the man, but he was only able to describe what he had seen because it was late, he was exhausted, and he was certain that his eyes were deceiving him. The building fortunately has a surveillance camera facing the lane. We were granted access to the reels of tape from the previous few days, and we combed through them to find the time frame where the man claimed to have seen the Piper. Only my partner Ken and I saw this video in the security room of the residential complex. The camera faced down the long, dark lane at an angle identical to the first footage. This was a much seedier area, with shattered glass and garbage all over the cobblestones. Then Green Sleeves, that same eerie tune, started to play. At first, it seemed to be coming from a distance in the shadows, but it progressively drew closer, and the closer it got, the more I started to tremble. The same scene that appeared in the first video clip reappeared again. The environment was mostly unchanged. The Piper continued to don the same unsettling mask, odd hat, and coat. Once more, he moved forward slowly and rhythmically while dancing all night. He continued to play while holding that wooden pipe to his lips. The 5 needy kids were still on either side of him and behind him. They continued to tightly grasp the lengthy, black and white handkerchiefs with both hands, nevertheless. But now their cheeks were emaciated and tear-stained, in contrast to previously when they had grinned and skipped along with their tormentor. They appeared much thinner than they had previously, dreadfully skinny. These kids looked as though they hadn't eaten in a week, and they had been traveling across the country on foot for the majority of that time. They were no longer having fun, instead, they were stumbling and falling, as if the Piper and his handkerchiefs were dragging them along. Still, they held onto the fabric and wouldn't let go. God, why didn't they let go when it was obvious that they were in excruciating pain and exhausted to the max? The Piper took one hand away from his pipe as Ken and I watched in shocked silence, yet he continued to play, skillfully using only 5 fingers on his instrument. His other hand reached into one of his coat's several pockets. We could see something pink and gray moving in his hand as he extended it. I strained my eyes to see the computer screen where we were seeing the video and had the horrible realization that he was holding a rat. The rat was big and strong, and it appeared well fed. The mangy fur, though, suggested some sort of illness. As the mouse twisted and clawed in the air, gnashing its sharp teeth, the Piper picked it up by the tail. It had an aggressive, even ferocious aspect. Suddenly, he threw it behind himself and the children. It scampered into the shadows after falling to the ground on all fours. After pulling out a second rat from a different pocket, he repeated the chilling process he had used on the first one. I could just about make out how his coat's fabric was wiggling as I got closer. How many was he carrying? More rodents were following the parade, lagging slightly behind and remaining just in the shadows, as my brain had just registered. They moved in small groups of 3 or 4, tenaciously following behind as they leapt and crawled over the debris and impediments in their path. The sinister image of the Piper and the helpless children eventually vanished from view, but the exodus of rats persisted for at least 10 minutes. Occasionally, The little figures would dart along the lane, always following. The entire investigative team was incomprehensibly shocked. Whatever it was that we had to cope with in this situation, it was much, much worse than we had anticipated. We kept the development in the case totally discreet and didn't release it to the press or the general public. I had a mixture of feelings, including confusion, helplessness, and fear. Fear for the children trapped inside that object, and a deeper fear stemming from my growing realization that there are beings out there that human minds are unable or unwilling to comprehend. The trail now started to become chilly. Due to the size of the search area and the lack of new witness sightings, there wasn't much we could do. Car checks were unavailable because the Piper was on foot. I've tried helicopter searches and monetary rewards. Nothing. Sniffer dogs were used, but nothing changed. I felt completely powerless to intervene on behalf of the missing children and solely accountable for any suffering they endured. The worst part was having to stand in front of the parents and admit that I was mistaken and that their children would not be returning home. Soon, a month had passed, and then two. The case was practically over. My coworkers stopped contributing to it, and my supervisors handed us new tasks. However, I found it difficult to focus on any fresh examples because my mind kept replaying the video. Nightmarish images of the horrifying, spine-chilling mask consumed much of my sleep. Then, 3 months later, I was picking up some samples from a separate precinct's forensics lab while paying a visit there. I overheard one of their policemen discussing how stories of a big freak rat migration were flooding the cops upstate, and how in one town, residents were trapped in their homes as the streets were overrun with the rodents. Instantly, my mind started to race. Of course, that was a complete wild guess. However, the Piper had been spotted traveling upstate, and such behavior from the animals was very inappropriate at that time of year, although such migrations do occur more frequently than you might expect in some agricultural towns only in the late summer. The only answer I could come up with was that, like the rats in that alley, they were drawn to something. At that moment, I would have done almost anything to find those children and provide some sort of resolution. I inquired about the place from the officers. I won't tell you its name, but it was a small rural settlement that was hidden away in the countryside and encircled by farms. I looked it up on my own and discovered that the town was a day's travel away. I kept this information from my superiors because I knew they wouldn't allow me to follow up on such a shaky lead. Ken was the only person I confided in because we both had the same level of investment. He consented to meet me there. The migrations had ended a month before we finally made it out. Even so, I was confident that we would find something. We learned from research and talking to the locals that the majority of the rats had been observed traveling toward an abandoned farm that was half a mile away. We arrived to the property and were immediately struck by the ominous atmosphere. I shuddered as I saw the large, dilapidated windmill looming ahead. When we arrived, the sun was starting to drop, and as soon as we got out of the car, the rats crowded around our feet. We also saw the rats right away. They emerged from hay bales and the surrounding vegetation, then vanished under our boot heels just as quickly. We initially traveled to the ancient farmhouse and searched every room for anything. The rats were considerably more numerous in this area, crowding the hallways and darting from rotting pantry shelves. Despite tearing the house apart and searching beneath mattresses and in cabinets, we came up empty-handed. We then climbed the slope to the large barn at the top. As we got closer, I had an uncontrollable want to look up. The barn must have been able to store more grain than was ever required. It had been a true agricultural leviathan when it had been in use. The roof had a sizable hole where the timbers had fallen, and the red and white paint was now peeling off. The heavy doors were flung wide, and Ken and I stepped inside. We were immediately struck by the smell, which was completely horrible and reminiscent of death. There was nothing within, it was completely dark inside. We carefully moved through the bulging hay piles that were stacked on top of one another all the way up to the roof after turning on our torches. The ground was covered in several inches of heavy, muddy straw that was also covered in mouse feces. Weak moonlight coming through the ceiling opening and our torches were the sole sources of illumination. The rats were all about us, continually scuttling by, brushing up against our legs. The haystacks appeared to be alive because they were writhing and twisting when I shone my flashlight on them. The items must have been completely packed inside each bale. One would occasionally spring from the hay. The rats were a source of worry for me. While they never quite mustered the bravery to attack us, they hissed and bared their teeth whenever we passed by. Thousands of yellow eyes could be seen looking from the shadows at the route ahead of us and chittering as I shone my torch far into the distance. It was among the most unsettling images I've ever had the unfortunate opportunity to witness. First to notice it was I. There is a faint sound coming from the barn's end. My ears could pick out the same blasted music as we drew near, hearts racing. Greensleeves. The only difference this time was that it wasn't being played on a wooden pipe. It had a unique tinkle that was somewhat reminiscent of a piano. Now Ken and I were both on high alert, waiting for that horrifying, smiling visage to suddenly emerge from the shadows. We eventually moved closer to the barn's outside. The barn should have continued for a few more minutes, but the back wall rose too swiftly. We then noticed the door. An old metal door was located in the middle of the back wall. It was made of strong steel and appeared to have been obtained from an industrial area. Rust covered the entire surface and left significant dents and scratches. I started to get a strange apprehension as I got nearer to the door. I wanted to turn around, leave that horrible location, and never return. I didn't want to peek through the door to what was there. Whatever it contained, I somehow knew it would be terrible. An ancient, broken music box was the noise's source. It was sitting just in front of the door. We let it keep playing because I couldn't locate any kind of switch or lever to turn it off. As we went on, it functioned almost as a background theme. Strangely, the door wasn't locked. After considerable effort, the handle finally creaked open when we tugged it down. The fragrance reached us at once. Ken turned and puked on the floor. It was 1,000 times worse than when we had originally entered the barn. I had a gut feeling that we would find something in there. I'll try to be as courteous to the departed as possible while describing what was behind the door. I don't like to give gory details, especially in this type of situation, but I absolutely must in order to convey the agony. If my recounting of it seems uncaring, it's because I've been crying for so long that I've become numb to it. A faux rear wall had been constructed to hide the room that was located behind the door. Although modest, the space wasn't crowded. 5 seats were arranged around a table that was in the middle of the room. Like the rest of the barn, the room's walls, floor, and furnishings were covered in rat feces, but this time it was concentrated considerably more. All the way to each chair were heavy chains that were fastened to the walls. Each chair had 2 chains with a manacle at the end of each one, probably for the purpose of shackling the feet. There were stacks upon stacks of paper drawings, children's drawings of buildings, stick figures, pirate ships, and random scribbles, as well as a pot of crayons and colored pencils in the middle of the table. God alone knows how long that monster held those helpless children captive. Every illustration was covered in blood. The table, chairs, walls, and floor were all covered with blood. Long dried and crusty, it was. You have no idea how challenging it is for me to write this. Only fragments of bodies were discovered there, not a single entire body. A few gnawed torsos, limbs, and appendages scattered over the space. Every area of the body that we discovered was riddled with bite marks, sometimes almost down to the bare bones. Tiny little teeth created tiny little gouges. They had little chance because the piper had held the kids in there, drawn the waves of rats, and shackled them. And he had abandoned them for the rats to eat. I've struggled a bit to type this. I can't stop gagging, I swear. In the middle of the blood and feces on the floor, we discovered that goddamn fucking mask. It gave us a stern look from above. Grinning. Mocking. Laughing. It chuckled, you couldn't save them. We stumbled out of the barn. I crushed the music box under my boot as I trampled on it. When we asked for backup, it quickly showed up. Ken and I already made the decision to just inform the parents that we had discovered the bodies. Nothing further. No specifics. Our team discovered more in the room during the coming weeks. DNA tests determined that a few teeth, bones, hair strands, and fingers belong to the 5 missing children. 5 have all been located. They discovered human urine and feces on the seats, which confirmed our fears that the kids had been in pain for a very long period. They discovered the handkerchiefs in a corner. We examined them. They had superglue all on them. Where baby hands had been wrenched away, there were pieces of skin and shredded flesh. The Piper was just a sick, perverted, depraved monster of a man. He wasn't an eldritch being, and he didn't use magic to entice the kids to follow him. Was he not? You see, I haven't been able to get the Greensleeves song out of my head since that day in the barn. No matter how much it disgusts me, I still catch myself humming it a year later. Even when I can make myself stop it, it keeps playing in the background of my head. However, these days, I hear it when it's late at night and I'm by myself, either in my room or working a night shift at my new accounting job. Now obviously, as if somebody is playing it outside on a wooden pipe. And I'm eager to hear. I need to leave the house. I'm sorry, but I had to stop my foot from tapping in time with the music. I want to walk off into the night and follow the music,